Hey guys, I am going to attempt to explain to you probably one of the hardest parts of compositing that compositors take a lot of years to really truly nail, kind of thinking this way because it's a different way of thinking. But it's the idea of using masks to mess with other masks. And it really kind of unlocks the power of Nuke. And I realize it's kind of crazy we're doing this as the last project, but once you have kind of a full CG render, it kind of really shows the capabilities of what you can do. So what do I mean by that? Well, everything that we've talked about so far this semester has been based on alphas, masks. So if I'm looking at just the alpha of my image, it's this. If I hit A in the viewer, that's my alpha. This is a mask. That's all this is a mask. Anytime you see a black and white image, it's a mask. It's literally telling you what to keep, everything in white, what to get rid of, everything in black, or what to mess with if I'm trying to use it as a mask. Only mess with the area in white. Don't touch the area in black. That's all a mask is. It's super simple. But that's where the real power of compositing, surfacing, so many of these areas of 3D art that you guys could possibly want to be interested in are really heavily based in understanding and really having a solid understanding of masks. So I'm going to try and show you what I mean by like how you can combine masks. So ignore kind of just any setup I have in here. I'm just going to kind of show you some examples in here. Hopefully this makes sense. If anybody doesn't, just holler and I am happy to try and explain it even more in detail. So I come from a world where I'm used to getting really noodly ridiculous notes at the nth hour, and you basically, as a compositor, are left with like, this is all I have. I have a read node of this image that was rendered. I don't have time to re-render it. I don't have time to make changes. I've got to work with what I got. So I say MacGyvering a lot. Like that's literally a verb. Like people have come up with that, but it's basically the idea of taking very little things that you have on hand and making it work to find the outcome that you need. So we have plenty of things to do pretty much almost anything you could want to do in this shot. I could figure out a way for us to do it if I sit here and kind of think through all my elements that I have and masks that I can make more like a puzzle. This really is a puzzle. That's really what I've loved about Nuke all these years and why I'm happy teaching it to y'all is because Nuke is like a puzzle. You get these cool, weird tools and weird puzzle pieces, and it's up to you to figure out the right combination to make these things do the things that you want. So let's say in this example, so this was kind of our like RGB rebuild. I'm gonna take this out of here so this doesn't distract anybody. But here's all the different lights that we had. So I kind of ended up with this sort of, sorry, I just dropped a tape measure off my table. Here's like our RGB rebuild. This is all the different light passes. You can come look at them each and see kind of the different lights that we're working with. And I noticed maybe, let's assume I really like this light, this top light. I think it's called top. So when I had this light in the scene, you can kind of see it forms like a line right here. It was a little too low. And you literally see the light reflected in the glass of these picture frames. So let's assume I did this shot. I put everything together and I'm like, this is perfect. I'm thrilled with this. And then somebody comes back and goes, I don't like seeing this in here. This looks like a mistake. It does look like a mistake. And anybody who uses this light, if you happen to, just know, I'm going to be like, hey, that's a mistake. So let's say I wanted to get rid of it. Okay. So we're going to look just at this layer, at this top light only. So this was just a shuffle set to that top light right there. So let's pretend this is the only thing in the world. And in fact, to make, I'll leave it here to make it easy to at least explain to y'all. So you can spread all of these out. Usually when I am doing stuff like this, I'll do kind of this sort of deal and I'll leave myself a little dot node in between of each one, kind of like this, so that I can have kind of a place to break off and do some stuff down here, kind of like how we're doing when we did like that copy from the beginning, copied the alpha over. Same sort of idea. Basically, this whole string is piped in directly from the read. So every channel, everything is exactly like it comes in from the read. So I can drop down something off of this and grab masks. I can grab whatever I want and apply it to each one of these layers individually. Think of each of these kind of as their own little thing that you can adjust. So in this case, I'm looking at this. So as a compositor, my job would be to go, how can I keep this light here, but not be here? And there's a couple options. So that's what's nice about Nuke is there's probably 5 or 6 ways to do any which thing you want to do. And none of them are necessarily wrong. Some are going to be better than others depending on the use case. If this was a shot that the camera was flying around the room or, whatever, my answer would be different for you depending. So if this is a locked off camera like this, it's just a still image. My first thought is let's run through the options that we have. We could roto and cut out these shapes and then do a grade and get rid of them from the image. We could cut out the whole window and do like a from and get rid of it. That's already 2 different ways to just kind of get it out of here. We could use a cryptomat and do a cryptomat of that inside glass piece there and just grade it down off of this image. It's probably, honestly, 90% of the time going to be your easiest option. We could also do point mats and do like a soft point mat back here. Maybe we don't want it on this whole area. We're okay if it's not on this whole area. We could do a point mat kind of in the middle here and wipe it off the frames entirely. Even kind of soften out this whole wall. There's a lot we can do. We could use depth if we wanted to isolate just this very back wall. So I'm going to show you like 2 or 3 different ways, hopefully pretty quickly, that y'all could ideally isolate and get rid of this, and maybe with a little bit of different results to the overall image, but different ways you could approach this. So way number 1, my right off the bat first thing that comes into my mind is a cryptomat. So if I throw a cryptomat in there, and I view it, I could select inside those frames, and now I've just made a mask of that area. And then if I view this and put a grade, really quick and easy, boom, gone. So now if I plus this back on top, that's all gone. Way number 1 that I can get rid of that. That's the first way that, I've done this for many, many years, more than all y'all, so my brain just kind of knows the proper in and outs and the ways that are going to work the easiest. That is one way. That is just one way. So let's say, I'm going to even make backdrops to show y'all. So we're going to say way number 1. So let's now say way number 2. Okay, so now we have way number 2. Way number 2, what if I was like, let's turn you off so we don't see you. Maybe I was like, maybe I'll try like a point mat. That would work. So let's say I'd already copied from that Word doc and I had a copy of my point mat in here. That's what I'm going to grab right here. But ideally you would have a nice, neat, brand new one. I'm going to move this over so I can make it a little bit neater and tidier. Okay. So let's say we hook up a point mat. So point mat, we don't need to shuffle anything out. We can just use it as is. And this is not the default settings that these typically have, but since I used it for something else, we're going to pretend it's more close-ish to this. Let's say I was like, here, you can kind of see the outline. Here's my picture frames. Maybe it's going to go here. Maybe it'll be something along those lines. Here, maybe even I want to like uber specific kind of mess with this wall here. Do something kind of like that. Cool. Then I'm just going to copy this same node because I already had it. But maybe I'm going to now take this grade node that's just multiplying down and I'm going to use the alpha of there. So that is a different result. That is just grading that down. But when I look at it together on the image, it looks okay. It looks pretty good. Really don't see that much of a difference. It takes a little bit of the light off this wall, but it's not a bad thing. It's okay. So that's another way. Both totally viable options. Both give you a solid result. Way number 3 I could do would be, and this is what's kind of cool once you start having all these passes under the hood, you're like, well, here's all sorts of ways that I could do this stuff. So let's say maybe this time I want to do it with my depth pass, because that's all the way the back wall right there. Do I want to do it with that? See, the problem that I would run into with that, I'll show you. So if I wanted to grade my depth, I'd come here, I'd change this to depth. I would hook this up. And then if I graded this, so remember you control click and kind of feel around. I can see about 500, about 400 in the middle. So let's try that. Let's try like 500, 400. Well, that's close-ish to the sofa. I can kind of finagle this in there. Kind of get the sofa area out of there. Maybe I'll push this back a little bit. So that covers that area. Let's try that. Let's see what happens. Take that same grade node. That, I need to change this because it's not the alpha. I need to actually set this to that RGB red. So if I did that, so this is that top light. If I go look at the top light, that actually might not be a problem because you see, it doesn't actually show anything in this back room. So considering the scene and the setup that we have in here, that's actually not a bad way that I could do that because that actually is solving for my problem. It's taking basically all that light off this back wall, but if that was what I wanted, that could be okay. It actually kind of fixes some of the kind of lighting silhouette problems that I see with the shadows from behind here. It's overly lit. So that's a viable option. All three of these, and there's more if you really kind of sat in here, like I said, I could still roto, I could still do all sorts of stuff. All three of these give me an acceptable result for what I'm trying to do. None of them are wrong. They're different looks and they're different ways of approaching the problem, which is super, super important. So let's say now, so the real power in compositing can kind of come in. So this is kind of just the idea of how you can approach a comp in multiple ways for a solution to any sort of problem that you run into. So where this kind of levels up is when you get to the point that you can add, basically like layer these things together. So what do I mean by that? Well, let's see if we pick a different pass. We'll find another one that has something cool we can do. Okay, maybe, trying to find one that has a good something we can do in here. Here, the sun had that kind of nuclear. All right, let's try this one. So let's do kind of like the example I showed in class. Let's say the sunlight pass. I like all the light that I'm getting here. I like the bounce light. I just don't like how hot this area is getting right here. It's clipping, it's blowing out. When everything gets kind of recombined, it's real bright. So how could I go about fixing that? Well, very similar to this, there's multiple ways you can do it. In general, when you're dealing with a CG render, the easiest way, I'm going to move this over so I have a little more room. The easiest way is going to be with a cryptomat. So put my little dot node here so I can kind of break some stuff off. So let's say we try this. Hey, we make a crypto. All right, let's say we select that. And that. Let's try that first. So let's say we come in here and we grade this down. We hook it into our crypto. So we're saying only this yellow area, and you can always hit A if you want to see the actual mask. Only this yellow area is what we are trying to affect. Okay? So I hooked that in as my mask to a grade. And now if I multiply that all the way down, we can see exactly what's happening. So if I do that, it's definitely less bright, but also now I'm running into an issue here where that stuff is coming in kind of funky. So now I'd probably have to come back in here and add these in. So then if I come look at it here now, like that's okay, but really I don't want this stuff. Like look at this yucky dark stuff I have happening down here. And like I didn't select this piece, so it's getting kind of weird and bright. It means I'd have to select even more. I'd have to kind of come select like there. It's just starting to become more problematic than it's worth just to clean up that little bit of hotness. So what are my options here? Now as a compositor, I'm basically left with maybe I want kind of this area to have that sort of stuff, but I don't want it here, and I don't really want it here, and I don't really like what it's doing in the back edge of that curtain. Okay, so now is where I need to start getting scrappy. Scrappy is always my favorite word to describe compositors, because that's what we are. We don't have time to go back and render. We don't have time or ability to, like the luxury of getting help with this stuff. We basically have to work with what we have. So at this point, I'd be like, what are my other options? Well, the easy option you always have in your back pocket that no one wants to do is a roto. I could literally do a soft roto shape around the area I want to keep, because usually the stuff I want to keep is going to be easier to isolate than the stuff I don't. So I might do something kind of soft like that. It's a locked off camera. And I might blur it. We'll see if that's enough or too much blur. And then I might think about like, well, if this is my mask here, I want to get rid of stuff here so that by the time that the grade is just looking at that for what to use to make it darker. So if I tell it someplace after here which parts I don't care about, which parts I don't want to actually make darker, like I don't want to make any of this stuff on the edge darker, basically outside of this little shape I made, I can do that. I can do it really easily by manipulating my grade. So if I'm viewing this, if I was to grade my mask, so that's where this comes in. It's all merges and grades and stuff that you're doing to your masks. So it's like a mask on mask type situation. It's not where a mask is affecting an RGB image. It's masks affecting other masks. So let's say here I put a grade on my Cryptomatte. You can always do that. Remember, I'm looking at the alpha here though. By default, this wants to work with RGB. You can either check this on, put on alpha, but you have to deal with this whole menu. So usually by default when I'm dealing with masks, I just change that first one. See, it was on RGBA. I change this first one to all. But then now if I kind of play, you can see I'm actually affecting that mask. If I come look at it here after doing that, this grade is basically saying don't do anything because I just graded it down. It's gone. If I play with this grade in here, you can see I'm controlling the strength of the mask now. I'm not controlling what the grade is doing. I'm controlling the strength of this mask. So if I was to hook this in to that roto shape that I just made, and I was to say, like you can see by default, since my mask was this, like I'll show you what the actual mask looks like. It looks like this. I actually want the invert of that because I want to keep this. I want to not have my mask right here. I want it not to be everything else. So like if I multiply down, I actually want to keep that, not get rid of it. I want to get rid of all this stuff. So I can just hit invert. See? And now basically everything that was in this shape, by grading this down, I'm basically saying get rid of all that stuff. Don't want that stuff. And now my mask looks like this. So now if I was to come back here and view this image, now I'm only grading down that area that was really hot and bright. I'm not messing with anything else. So conversely, if I wanted, I could always fix this and maybe instead, like I flipped that. So now if you look, it was that mask that has like the hole in it. maybe I back off on this a little bit. But maybe this is what my mask looks like. Maybe instead, what I'm looking at is maybe I wanted to lift up the other areas. Maybe I want it all to be a little brighter, but I don't want to make this part any brighter. See? Same masks, same stuff, but I'm able to control more by making my masks grade my masks. It's a very weird concept to wrap your head around. The one that tends to kind of be I think the easiest way to show this, oops, I deleted too much, is, so let's assume I have my whole image done. The one I kind of mentioned in class that I think is a good example is the ambient occlusion pass. So to make an AO pass visible, we basically have to shuffle it out. So if you remember, I'm a big fan of doing this like this. I have my, I know it's a little wonky because I made this bigger. There. I have this main line that's going from here, from the read node all the way down, copying in here. So this point right here, I can kind of do whatever I want, and I can hook into it. It's basically like hooking into the original read node. I can make little backdrops. So I usually kind of have this like almost like little branches coming off from pulling anything I need. But in this shuffle, I want to do my AO pass. So let's go find that. So AO, and it already hooks it up for you. So let's view that guy. So remember I said XGen and like any of this hair groomy type stuff like cloth or hair can come in really dark. So if I was to just put this on top of my image, which I would do with multiply, so if I do that, that looks good in some places. Like I like what it's doing on the sofa. I like what it's doing on the back wall. Usually it'll give you some kind of cool looking stuff that really can kind of anchor your shot and make everything feel a lot more real, even though it's not super real. But it makes my rug look really dark and dirty and gross, and I don't like that. There's already enough lighting and stuff going on this rug. I don't want all that. So, like I said, that stuff comes in a little darker here. So how can I isolate it? Like this is a mask, black and white, just like what we've been talking about there. In fact, I could even use this as a mask. I'm just showing you like what I mean by like this is just a black and white image. Black and white images, no matter what, can be used as masks. So if I wanted to, I'm going to disable that for a second and just show you. If I was to hook into that with just a plain old grade and view it, I would have to change my mask to one of the color channels, red, green, or blue, because it's all white and black. But if I change to one of them, if I was to grade down, I could literally, it's hard to see, I could literally kind of grade down the same way. It's almost doing the same thing. Because if I did this, if you see what I did, I hooked it up to the RGBA, which is part of this image. If I set this to nothing, if I just put it on a grade like this, it's basically saying everywhere in this image that's white, the whiter it is, the better. Use it as a mask and let me grade stuff down. And like, look what it's doing. It's pretty gross. Looks bad. But if I was to invert that, which if I did that, just so you see, just for visual help here, not for real life, if I make an invert node, guess what that node does? It just flips everything. Makes it like an x-ray. But if I was to invert this, so it's like a negative, this is what it looks like. If I ever invert a mask, this is basically all it's doing. It's just flipping it so black is white, white is black. It's really all it's doing. Color, it deals with color and stuff too. But for masks, it's making black, white, white is black. So anything black in here now, all the dark stuff in the real ambient occlusion image is now what I'm masking things by. Got it? So black is now white, white is now black. But if I was to make a grade and hook that in, by default, it's going to look pretty yucky. If I invert it and I grade all the way down by the inverted image, it's just going to basically take all those black areas and treat them like the area that I want to mask stuff by and grade it down. So this is actually no different than if I did this way and hooked it up with a merge. Two different ways to do the same thing. but um, but it gives me that image. I'm trying to remember where I was going with this for y'all. I don't remember. I was just showing you how you could invert them by what happens if you invert the mask. But, ooh, I deleted too much. But let's say I have this multiplied on top of here, and I just don't want this to affect this. That's where I was getting at with this, is that this is black and white. It's just a mask. When we're applying it as ambient occlusion like this and setting it to multiply, it would be no different than if we had like, this back wall was black and we set it to multiply to make the wall black. It's serving a different purpose, but it's just mask. So we can mess with this image. If we don't want something to be calculated into the AO, like if we really don't want to see anything on these walls, for instance, like let's try that. That's weird. But let's say if we didn't want to see anything on those walls, if we know it's a specific part of the room, we don't have to deal with point mats, we don't have to deal with rotos, we can literally just deal with a cryptomat. So let's try that. Let's hook that in. And I'll view it. Let's say for whatever reason, we do not want AO on the walls and the trim. Weird, but let's say that's what we want. Okay, no walls and trim. Here's my mask. Walls and trim. Here, we'll do these ones too, because that's technically trim. Sure, we'll do you too. It's gonna be way too much, but we'll try it. All right, to say I really don't want this part, this, to be included in my AO. By making this cryptomat, my alpha, it's just a black and white mask. It's all that is. I can use that to mess with this image. I could grade it. I could put a constant over it. I could do all kind of stuff, but the easiest thing just off the top of my head is probably going to be a grade. So if I hook this image in, and it is the alpha already, so this should be good. I could crank up the gamma and make those walls and things go a lot whiter. Now if I was to go view this, there's still a little bit happening. A constant would copying your cryptomat alpha to a constant, pre-multing that down, and then adding it on top of your ambient occlusion. In this case, would actually give you like a solid white thing. You get no contribution. But this would be the difference between that and that. If, let's clear that. Let's say I really just want to get rid of the rug. There's my rug. So you can select if a cryptomat's open, you can select in the RGB and it'll select the right stuff. But just so you can see, this is what I selected. But now that would essentially be taking this image and grading through the roof that rug. So I'm using this mask from a cryptomat to affect this mask, if you think of AO like a mask. So then now, if I apply that, I can look and see, I can put down the AO and everything else, but it's not really affecting that rug as much. Really, really, really powerful. As far as other ways you can utilize this, what do I mean as far as other ways that you can mix masks? Someone did this in class today. This was a good one. I'm just going to do this down here as an example. So we're going to pretend all this other stuff is gone. Let's imagine you're all done with everything, and for whatever reason, you want to make this side of the sofa darker. How would you, or hey, let's do it with this one since this one's kind of at camera. Let's assume, since this is so kind of dark over here, let's assume we want this part of the sofa kind of at camera to be a little bit darker. How would we do that? Well, it's pretty easy. So first, if I know I'm dealing with the sofa, my first thought is probably going to be, let's see if we can get a cryptomat. Because that's always going to be my easiest thing. So sure enough, I can get a crypto of the sofa. I got this crypto. Perfect. That's my sofa. If I was to just go apply this as is right now, what did I say? I said I wanted to make it darker. Let's go see. Let's make it like really dark so you can see what I'm talking about. Okay, so say I like that color. I want my sofa to be like that at camera, but I don't want to affect it farther away. So now it's my job as a compositor to go like, well, what can I do to isolate more this area to be affected and less the other area farther away? Well, roto is always a viable option. Sometimes it's not a good option, but it's viable. You could do it. In this case, I don't want to have to roto stuff. That's dumb. I usually have something under the hood that I can use that's going to be a little more correct and automated for me. My first thought is that stuff is going away from camera. Anytime anything is going away from camera, I can use depth to inform that sort of information. So let's try that. I'm going to shuffle out my depth pass. And this can get a little messy if you start having a bunch of stuff branch off from this. Just kind of organize it as you go. Do your best. All right, so I'm going to change this to depth. And remember, I have to hook up my depth. That. And now I know roughly where that sofa is. So I'm going to kind of feel around here and see. So I see like about 250. About 350-ish. I know it's not perfect, but let's say 350, 250. So there's a lot of other stuff going on in the image, but that's actually not bad. I can see kind of the front of my sofa is black, meaning it's not going to be affected. Back of the sofa is pretty red. In fact, let's even like really get that. I took it down just a little bit so you can kind of see. So let's say I'm happy with this. So, well, now I have this image, which here, I'll make it all the color so it looks white so it doesn't confuse anybody. Just an extra step you don't need to do. So let's say I have this image of my depth and I have this mask. So I'm left with a problem now of how do I basically get what I like of this pass and what I like of this pass and combine them. So this is what I mean by how to combine masks. So there's multiple ways, of course, to do this. You could, the easiest way would be a grade. So let's do that. I could either grade this image, and all of these are correct. So like watch, I'm just gonna hook this up to that cryptomat of the chair and multiply down. So it's obviously gonna be set to the wrong thing. I'm gonna have to change this to invert. But there you have it. I just made a mask of that chair. Similarly, I could do it to my cryptomat. So if this was my cryptomat, I could put a grade here, and pull this down just a touch, and hook that into my graded depth pass. So since the depth is in the RGB, I'd have to change this to one of the RGB values. In this case, instead of white, I put all three colors in there. I could pick any of them, but usually when I'm doing depth stuff, I just grab the RGB red. So if I did that, and then I'm basically telling it, I'm telling it just look at this image. That's what you're working with. That is your mask. So if I come here and it is set to all, so this is the only thing is that you do have to be mindful of, are you dealing with an alpha channel or are you dealing with RGB? If it's alpha, just make sure the layer you're editing is set to affect the alpha in some way. All is a safe bet to get your alpha, or you can manually click alpha. But I'm gonna say all. So if I multiply that down, it's inverted, obviously, so I could flip that and do that. See? But now it's taking that image, or the inverse of this, and grading down that image. So now I was able to take a solid cryptomat of a chair or a sofa and a depth pass and grade the two together to let one mask mess with the other mask. Just like that. So now I could 100% come mess with my chair. Ooh, and actually here I did it backwards from what I was telling you. So let's make it darker at camera. that is easy to do. I would just basically uninvert this so that now my mask looks like this. That's all I did was check off invert so that my mask goes from looking like that to that. But if I did that, now it's only going to get darker or closer to camera. So tons of possibility there of how you can do this. I know it's a very tricky concept to kind of really wrap your head around, especially for those of y'all that are still kind of trying to get masking and alphas and stuff under your belt. It's just a black and white image that you use to inform where you make changes and where you don't. But depth is one way we could do this. You could also do it with a point mat. Really quick and easy. In fact, I have a point mat that I'm going to copy here, and I can show you just to see. Let's say this shape is probably going to be good enough. For stuff like this is actually a nice tool for this because it gives you pretty finite control of what you want. So if I wanted to really dial in a specific area, I could do this. But then I could unhook that mask and hook it into this instead. Now if I do this is backwards, so I'd have to hit invert. Basically just look at your stuff. If it's inverted of what you want, bam, just come hit invert. But super fast, that was another way I was able to kind of get it. And if I spend some time, I could kind of dial those in and really get them to be the same. But that is another viable way to mix a mask. So you'll see this kind of stuff a lot where you're mixing depth passes with rotos or with point mat passes or something of the like, so you can like really kind of dial in the look of the scene. Another common one you'll see a lot, like I'm just trying to show you a couple examples of how to grade depth. Or how to grade depth, how to mix mats like this. So let's say I just took all this stuff out of here. I'm going to turn this off. Let's say we graded our depth. Sorry, this video is getting a little long, but I'm trying to make sure y'all get all this stuff. And I'm going to hook in all three so that they're nice and white. So let's say this is our depth. We're going to grade it. My mouse, I'm seeing about 200, 530. Remember, I'm looking down here at the bottom. 530. All right, let's say like 530, 200. Cool. So that has this back wall, pretty solid white. At camera is pretty flat. Let's go with that. But let's say I hook this up. So remember, I already just had a grade that's looking at the image. So this image is looking at the RGB, remember, not the alpha. Our alpha looks like that. Just always check up here what layer you're looking at. So I need to change this one to one of the RGB channels. I'm going to say RGB red. So let's say I had this very kind of aggressive depth pass like this. Let's say I was looking to make the back wall darker. So that is 100% doing that. But let's say I did this and then I get a note. And the note is, well, actually, I only want the darkness at the top of the frame. I don't want it on the whole wall evenly. I want it darker at the top and then it fades off to the bottom. Totally, totally doable. Again, you can always go in with a roto paint and do stuff, but I want to try and use the smart passes I have when I can. So let's try a P pass. And in this case, I'm going to do it not as a point mat. I'm going to show you how to do it the regular way. So if you make a shuffle and hook it in to where it's able to see that pass. If you ever are unsure if you're at the right spot for where to hook this stuff in, if you don't see those options when you come in here, you're in the wrong spot. So hook something in differently until you see these things. But let's say we look at our P pass. So remember, that one is the one that green corresponds to Y, red corresponds to X, blue to Z. So let's say, I just know from doing this, but you can fiddle around with them and make sure you get the right one. Y is up and down. So if I shuffle that one and I go view it, it's just going to look weird and green. But if I mouse over it, I can kind of see it starts off at about 0. It goes up to like 215, about down here. So same as our AO, we can grade this. So if I say like 210 to 0, you can see it grades so that this is about like a solid white if this was one color, and this is black. And I can grade it and do more stuff to it. So let's say I love that. That looks great. Just a mask. That's all this is. If the color thing throws you for a loop of seeing this green instead of red instead of white, you can always come and just hook that thing, whatever you're isolating, into all 3 channels, and it'll look white. But let's say this is what I'm happy with, and I have this mask. So now I have my depth layer that pushes from the front to the back. And I also have this one that's just at the top of the room down. So those are 2 different axes. One's going back to the back of the room, one's going top down. I can then use this to grade this. So I can literally just put a grade node on this, which if I was to play with it, you can see it grades stuff. Let's say I hook this in to the output of where I got this stuff. So it is RGB that I'm dealing with, not the alpha. So I do need to change this. I'm going to change this to red. But now if I multiply this down, this image is able to start grading down that image. So now if I go look at my alpha, the change that this, here, let me put this a little bit of an easier way for y'all to see. So that node that's grading down the top, that's all it's doing. You can see, maybe that's a little too aggressive. Maybe I want it a little bit higher. Maybe I only want it like right there. So then if I'm viewing this image, that looks like that now. So let's go see what that does. So that is letting me still grade so let's turn this off and see. So this is just the depth, remember? All the way to the back of the room is getting dark, jet black dark. But if I don't want to affect the top, if I take this pass that is just the top, up and down, just all the up and down values, and I apply it here in grade, it can take off the top of that mask so that when I view it here, it doesn't account for that area. It's kind of cool. If for whatever reason I was like, actually I want it dark up top, I don't want it dark at the bottom, but bam, just invert it. Just hit the invert on the mask. And now that would leave you with the bottom of the room not being affected. Kind of neat. So that would let you then be able to darken down the back of the room based off of depth, but only at the top. So it's all just about combining masks and just treating and understanding that these things are just black and white images. And if you have a black and white image, you can use it to mask and manipulate things. You can blur stuff, you can change colors, values, you name it. But as long as you got a black and white mask of any form, it's really no different than when you make a weird wonky shape. That is a mask. Black and white. If I hook this up to anything, it's going to affect stuff. It's just what masks do. So masks are just black and white images. Don't be afraid of them. They're not as daunting as they seem. But if you know how to manipulate them, you can use masks to mess with stuff even more. And if I wanted to get even crazier, I could then pull cryptomats and like cut out the lamps or cut out the sofa, or, isolate exactly what I want it to be. If I only want it on this back wall right here, I could mess with make a cryptomat of just this back wall and grade down everything else. But it's all just about combining masks.